speaking. And remind you that when you do speak, to please state your name beforehand so that we have the information for the purposes of the minutes. So the first thing that we're going to do is to ask Ms. Taylor to take a roll call to confirm that there is a quorum present.
All right. Randall Beatty.
Here.
Maria Trell.
I'm here.
Dr. Corrado.
Here.
Here.
Dr. Jackson.
Here.
Dr. Levine.
Here.
Dr. Maha.
Here.
Rich Myers.
Here.
Kristen Schelling.
Here.
Travis Spender. St. Clair.
Here.
Kenneth Zersey.
I'm here also.
Ms. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to welcome our new member, Kristen Schelling. Hi, Kristen. Kristen works currently at the Michigan State Police Lab. She is the biology technical leader there. And she's taking the seat that she's in is the forensic biology seat that Carl Serblowski held previously. So welcome, Kristen. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. So just as a reminder, everyone, please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. Thank you. And the first order of business today is adoption of the agenda for the meeting. And the members should have received a copy of the agenda from Ms. Taylor previously through email. And I would ask for a motion to adopt the draft agenda. And please remember, when you make a motion or second, to state your name first for the minutes. So do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Les Edinburgh, so moved.
A second?
Ken Zersey, second.
Thank you. So the agenda is adopted. And Ms. Taylor, it's not adopted yet. Ms. Taylor, could you please take a roll call for the votes to adopt the agenda?
Yes, before I take the roll call, I just want to make sure that Travis Spender is present. I see that he's on the meeting, but I did not hear him say that he was here.
Travis, are you there?
Your line is muted, so I cannot hear you.
Trying to unmute it. It won't unmute.
Travis, this is Dave Barron. I'm going to unmute you. Okay.
Yes, I'm
Travis.
here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the roll call now. Mr. Beatty.
Aye.
Luttrell.
Aye.
Dr. Corrado.
Aye.
Dr. Cotton. Dr. Cotton.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Edinburgh.
Aye.
Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Shelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Zersi.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. The agenda is adopted. The next item on the agenda is the election of chair and vice chair. So in accordance with the bylaws, the terms of the chair and vice chair are only 1 year. So we must elect the chair and vice chair each year. For the vice chair, Maureen Bottrill is the current vice chair, and she has only served for 1 term. So she is eligible to serve as vice chair for another term. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
This is Linda. I nominate Maureen Bottrill.
Thank you. Are there any seconds for that nomination?
Les Edinburgh,
George
I
Maha,
second.
seconds.
Okay. That was George for a second. Thank you. Are there any other additional nominations?
This is Maureen. I did mention this to Katya yesterday, and she was going to check and see, whether or not this affected anything. I am retiring from the FBI the end of August, so I don't know whether or not my membership is tied to that at all, or whether or not you're going to need to replace me. If I am, if I am allowed to continue on the committee, even though I'm retired from the FBI, then I'm happy to serve in this position. But if you guys are going to need to boot me, you may need to get another person. So Katja was going to look that up, so I don't know whether or not she had a chance to do that.
Maureen, this is Katja. You are eligible to stay on the stack.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. And lucky you for being able to retire. Are there any other nominations? If hearing none, I will ask Ms. Taylor to please take a roll call to record the ayes and nays.
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Bottrill,
Aye.
Dr. Karada,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Shelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Zersi.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great. Well, I'm pleased to announce that Maureen Bottrill will be our vice chair for the upcoming year. Second, I have to advise the SAC that I am in my 2nd term as chair, and therefore I am not eligible to serve another term. But any other member of the committee is able to be chair. So do I have any nominations for chair?
Les Edinburgh, I nominate Rich Myers.
Do we have a second for that?
Maureen, I'll second.
Okay, great. Do we have any other additional nominations at this time? Hearing none, I'll ask Ms. Taylor to please call the roll call to nominate, to vote on Rich Myers as the new chair.
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Bottrill,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Ma,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
I think I'll abstain.
Ms. Shelley,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Aye.
the motion passes.
Great. Well, I would pleased to announce that Rich Myers is our new chair, and I am more than happy to turn over the reins to him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Trotta, for serving, and I look forward to serving for another year. So at this time, our next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the October 2nd, 2019 meeting. Ms. Taylor previously sent a link to the draft minutes, and so hopefully you've had a chance to review those. And if you have, are there any proposed changes to the minutes as you've read them? Any comments or questions about those minutes? I did note on line 187, it's just the word recommend should be recommended. Does anybody else have any other comments, questions? Do we need to vote on that particular amendment, or can we just make the correction?
Rich, I think you can, this is Katja, I think you can probably make or have somebody make a motion to adopt the amendments with that one change that you just stated on line 187.
Okay. All right. So do we have a motion to adopt the minutes as amended?
West Edinburgh was so moved.
Second.
This is Jamie. I second.
All righty. Ms. Taylor, can you please call the vote?
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Shelling,
I will abstain.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Xerxes,
Aye.
the motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. The next item up for discussion is the presentation of the director's report by Director Linda Jackson. Ms. Jackson.
All right. Let me share my content here. All right. So first of all, thank everybody for those of you that participated in subcommittee meetings yesterday and this morning. We certainly really appreciate your thorough and input into the methods that we have newly implemented and newly validated, and especially the input that you give for methods that are in development or in the process of validation so that we can take things into consideration while it's still in progress. So I know that those are generally kind of long documents to read, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated your efforts. For those of you that are that don't have the slides, they are available on the website. And so if you go to our DFS website at About DFS and then go under the Scientific Advisory Committee and Meetings and Meeting Minutes, you will find the presentations that are going to be presented today. All right, so I wanted to start by talking about some of the things and changes and actions that we have taken as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, we are a laboratory that is governmental in nature, and we are required to continue our activities to the criminal justice system. And so we've done that while trying to increase safety for our customers and for our staff. We have been able to maintain normal business hours for law enforcement bringing in evidence. We have encouraged mail-in evidence wherever that's possible. And we've also encouraged being able to send in the requests for analysis, or RFLEs, ahead of time so that that can be done prior to someone coming into the laboratory. So the forensic scientists, in order to have more space and to be able to handle their private lives as well, have been on a much more staggered work schedule. No one is allowed to work alone. Everyone must work with a buddy, but we have allowed for more greatly staggered work schedules to include evenings and weekends. We also have allowed for scientists to be able to telework 1 day a week, which was never allowed in the past, and we've made some changes about how things are done. Obviously, evidence is not taken out of the lab. It's purely things that can be done over the network and or paperwork and training, that kind of things. So we have sent out communications to our customers recommending that anyone who needs to contact a scientist do so by email, since people have more sporadic schedules, and have provided email and phone contacts for all of our scientists. We do maintain video testimony capabilities, which is one of the things that the Supreme Court has recommended as something to consider as we've been under a judicial emergency. We are still in Virginia not holding jury trials, but there have been DYD days and such that have begun again. And so we have always had the capability of providing video testimony. In Virginia, it is required that all parties agree to utilize video testimony. And so that is one of the reasons probably why it's not used that often, but we have seen an uptick in its use. So for evidence receiving, I think I already mentioned a couple of these. We are requiring face masks of folks that come into the lab, as well as our folks that are interacting with customers. Making appointments has definitely made it so that it's easier to stagger when people are in the laboratory bringing in evidence. Our breath alcohol section, we did receive guidance from the VOSH, which is kind of the equivalent of OSHA for Virginia, for additional safety practices and precautions that should be taken into account when using the breath instruments. And so we have notified all the operators of those mandatory precautionary measures, and are proud to say that during this time when we were trying not to travel excessively, no instruments went outside of their certification. And so all instruments continue to be available for breath tests, although there has been a significant reduction in the number of tests that have been run. And you can see the numbers down at the bottom, that the numbers of tests that were run in January and February were very similar to those in January and February of 2019. But then you can see the significant drop for March, especially April, and then May and June. We did have to make some changes to the training courses that we are offering in the areas that we offer training. One is for the breath alcohol operators. A couple of years ago, we did develop an online recertification option if you had performed a breath test within a certain period of time. And so that was very helpful in being able to recertify a good portion of operators that needed that, but we did not have any of the initial operator training classes until June 22nd. And we had our first one at a reduced class size with some additional precautions being taken. The attorney training that we had begun 2 years ago and offered last year for both DNA and DUI, DUID, those have been canceled for 20. And in the forensic training section, they did take the opportunity to provide a couple of training options online. And it was not just online, it was where some instruction was given, examples were shown, and then the students went off to go and do actual activities, and then they would bring that back and show those, especially for photography type things, in the class and have discussions. And so our training section has been great in kind of shifting and pivoting to this online option. And although they were very excited to resume their in-person class, the first one was just recently on July 6th. But now that they have seen that it is possible to do web-based classes, I think that the option will be there to do that in the future some, which could be very helpful to some of our jurisdictions that are so far from one of our laboratories. Just wanted to give a little update about where we are with our central laboratory capital project. This timeline I have shown before, but we did purchase the land for a new laboratory officially in December of 2019. It is a few miles north of where our lab is now. So it is not in the downtown area. It is up, you can see the red dot up here where it is right off of 295, which is just one exit over from Highway I-95, which provides great access, and it will also provide a lot more parking, which is great. And so we are currently in the design stage, and we are starting with the first drafts of some drawings, and we'll be meeting again to look at those in August. So it's an exciting time, and you know, but there's not a lot to see. There's one picture up on the slide of one potential design option where that big portion on the left-hand side would be the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and the training, as well as a bunch of just offices for statewide functions. And then the whole entire right-hand side would be the central laboratory. Excuse me. So we have developed and worked with the Commonwealth Attorneys Association on developing a customer working group. This is a group of law enforcement and attorneys who will be available as a group to discuss certain issues that we are interested in having feedback. So looking at different policies for triaging of evidence or changes to our submission policies, that type of thing. It is a group that we can take those types of questions to and have feedback from different areas of the state and different types of, you know, sheriffs, police, big town, big city, little town, all of that kind of stuff. So we had our first meeting. We had to cancel the first meeting actually, and then we rescheduled and held it virtually in May. And at that meeting, we went through kind of all of our submission policies that we've been testing to develop any feedback that we had from that. We didn't get a whole lot of feedback, but we're looking forward as we move towards new policies of having this group put together to receive it. Our National Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or SAKI grant, the testing phase is at the end. All of the kits that are going to be submitted to Bodie have been submitted to Bodie, and the results have come back. We do still have just under 100 data, the data from cases to review and do searches if that is appropriate. And so we definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have applied, again, we're a subrecipient from the Office of the Attorney General, but we have a small piece of the newer SAKI grant that goes through 2022 to continue paying the salary and benefits of our PERC tracking system coordinator. And so that is very beneficial, because as it rolls out and is mandatory for use, I think that having that resource for the customer, for the law enforcement, will be very important. All right, so some of the other things that we've had to think about with COVID is the fact that it has had some stress to the economy. I think everyone understands that that might be an understatement. But the Chief of Staff sent out a memo that required all executive branch agencies to move into a hiring freeze. We do have to obtain exemptions for any hiring from the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. There is an exemption for positions that directly affect public safety and public health. And so we do have a few positions, scientist-related positions that have been exempted. And so we have had some positions that have been posted, which is great, as well as positions that are on grant funds. Those are also exempted. So we were also asked to put forward some any savings that our agency could pledge for fiscal year 20, which fiscal year 20 ended June 30. And so our agency put forward $300,000. Some of that, or the largest chunk, was from the savings where we did not send cases from the drug section to the outsourcing lab in April and in May. And so that was $100,000. We did have some personnel cost savings because of that hiring freeze, and reduced travel and training expenses just because people were not going anywhere. And we did delay replacing the video equipment in our central laboratory to the next fiscal year. So the biennial budget was signed by the governor, and these are our budget numbers. And we did have some additional funds that were put in the budget, but unfortunately, all of those funds, which were for 2 IT positions and the costs of increased maintenance of lab equipment, some of those QTOFs and big ticket, expensive maintenance contracts that are new needed to be allocated. But both of those items, they are still in the budget, but they were unallocated, meaning the General Assembly and Governor will have to take action before we would actually be given those funds to spend. Speaking of grants, I will not go through all of these grants. There's the listing of all the grants that are current that I will not talk about, and then I'll just briefly mention the ones that we have applied for or in the process of applying for since the Forensic Science Board has met last. And so we will be asking tomorrow for permission to accept those funds if awarded. Some of them are continuations, and some of them are formula grants where we are given a certain amount of funds for Virginia. So you can see these here. One is a continuation grant of some CDC money based on the opioid crisis for some resources in toxicology. Our Coverdell grant, that value that you see there, the $225,000, that is half of what is allocated to Virginia because we split the amount with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. We also did apply for one competitive Coverdell grant to hire a forensic toxicologist trainee so that we could train an additional toxicologist. We did apply for two different research projects for the NIJ Research and Evaluation for Testing and Interpretation of Physical Evidence and Publicly Funded Forensic Laboratories grant program. That is a mouthful. One in toxicology, which Jim will talk about later, and the other in firearms and tool marks, which Sabrina will describe. We did get $26,000 through DCJS for the emergency supplemental funding for coronavirus. That mainly is going to reimburse the laboratory for things such as the purchasing of additional PPE, thermometers, having the laboratory sanitized, stuff. The SACI grant I had already talked about. And the last thing is that we have worked with DCJS to continue the funding under their JAG program to fund the salary for our part-time instructor in our forensic training section. This allows us to offer that third session of the Forensic Academy, which has been greatly helpful. So from a workload perspective, these numbers in this graph for submissions are all for the second quarter of 2020. So that's calendar year 2020. So that's the months of April, May, and June. And I just wanted to show the changes in submissions because we have seen a significant decrease in submissions in some of the sections, and almost no change in some of the other sections. If you notice for controlled substances in particular, that is a significant decrease, almost a little more than 2,000 cases less in 2020 than in 2019, which has been greatly helpful in helping to reduce the backlog. But then you can see in toxicology, we had almost no change at all. And that is, I think, due at least somewhat in part of an increase in the number of cases from the medical examiner's office. So the backlogs, sorry, trying to see if I can move this. I have a little thing from the presentation that was over top of my slide that I couldn't see the numbers, but the backlogs have decreased significantly since last year, especially in our digital and multimedia evidence section, controlled substances, and somewhat in forensic biology is down 11%, which is great. Some of the other sections have gone up, and the note to the side is very true. There are certainly a lot of factors that affect the backlogs. You know, controlled substances has gone down significantly, partly because of the lower submissions, partly because we now have 9 more scientists this year that are qualified than last year. And the outsourcing, several things are part of that. And you will see the sections where the backlogs have gone up, like firearms and tool marks and latent prints. When you see the staffing information that Sabrina will be presenting, you will see that that is probably related as well. So these are the average turnaround times for the cases that were completed in June. And it's been great having this up on the website so that folks can see where we are with any one section. I will say with digital and multimedia evidence, we have some older cases that we've been trying to get out and work on. And so when you take a case from several years ago and do the analysis, it does skew the turnaround times when they're averaged in with the others. And then I won't go through all of these, but this is just here for your information. And that is just kind of the trends for backlogs and submissions. These are by quarter, and the caseload is, the number or the snapshot of where the backlog was at the end of that quarter. And you can see that for each of the sections. Obviously, if you look at the last quarter for controlled substances, the number of cases, you can see that submissions were very low, and the number of cases that were completed was very high, and it made a huge difference. Certainly controlled substances is one of the sections, that and toxicology, that have had the most benefit from not having to go to court. Digital multimedia, firearms, forensic biology, latent prints, and impressions is included in that as well. Toxicology. And I will say that we continue to meet the necessary criteria for the medical examiner's office of having at least 90% of our cases done within 90 days. And whenever we have had issues with that at one particular, one lab versus another, due to staffing or some such, we have been transferring medical examiner cases between laboratories. And trace evidence. So that is what I had to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. And thank you.
All right, any questions from Ms. Jackson? For Ms. Jackson.
I have a question, Linda. This is Kathy Corrado.
Yes.
I was just curious, you talked about the video court proceedings, but is the state having trials, or is that just for like pretrial hearings and things like that?
So there have been very, very few trials of any kind, and the ones that have been done have generally been in front of a judge because there is a moratorium on jury trials. And so I will let Amy jump in and words if she has anything that would be helpful.
Yeah, so as long as the parties agree, we can do video testimony by for trial. The courts just got back online really here June 22nd and started having bench trials. And so for some jurisdictions, particularly up in Northern Virginia, they have relied on some video testimony from our examiners rather than having our folks come in just to reduce the number of people in the courtroom. But for the most part, we are still trying to get back up to speed with jury trials. There's actually a Supreme Court task force working on what they can put into in effect for that. We may see a continuation of video testimony even beyond when they get the jury trials rolling again. But again, it has to be done with the agreement of both parties. The defendant can require that all the witnesses be present in the courtroom if they choose to.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I appreciate that.
All right, any other questions for Linda? Alrighty, the next item on the agenda is the Controlled Substances Subcommittee report. So I guess I will give that report. So yesterday, the Controlled Substances Subcommittee, consisting of myself, Ms. St. Clair, and Ms. Buttrell, we reviewed the controlled substances method validations. We looked at the cannabis 4-aminophenol chemical test. Sorry about that. There's somebody coming in the building, and I think it's in my office. So we have a semi-quantitative. We also looked at the semi-quantitative analysis of delta-9 THC using GCFID, the semi-quantitative analysis of total THC in alternative matrices using GCFID, and we just reviewed the validation plan for that, and we also reviewed the validation plan for the cannabis plant material drying and decarboxylation study plan. We reviewed those. We had a couple questions that were satisfactorily answered by the scientists, and we completed the review of those with no major outstanding recommendations. We also looked at the discussion of methods in development. So Dr. Wagner and Ms. Weimer reviewed for us a couple methods that they're looking into working on, looking at THC, THCA, and CBD by HPLC, the quantitative analysis of those compounds by GCFID, and also a confirmation of THCA using tandem mass spectrometry. All those were, again, reviewed, questions answered, and the committee agreed with the recommendations of the department, and that's it. Any questions about that? Alrighty. So I guess I'll ask for a motion to accept the Controlled Substances Subcommittee reports.
This is Maureen. I move to accept the report.
And a second.
This is Jamie. I move to second, or I second.
Alrighty, Ms. Taylor, can you take the vote, please?
Reed,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh, Dr. Edinburgh,
He's muted. Does it count if he does a thumbs up?
that's fine. Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Schelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Xerxes,
Aye.
the motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. And now we will listen to the Toxicology Subcommittee report by Dr. Edinburgh. if his sound is working. We can't hear you, Dr. Edinburgh. Did you want to try to call in? Should we proceed with the forensic biology subcommittee report with Dr. Corrado and then come back to toxicology later?
That's fine with me if that's okay with everyone in Virginia. Okay, so the forensic biology subcommittee met this morning. Ms. Schelling and Dr. Maha and myself met, and we reviewed and discussed the validation of YSTR half reactions on the 3500 genetic analyzer with the Y-Filer kit, and also the performance checks for the 4 different laboratories. We had a good discussion. The validations were very comprehensive. There were a few questions from the subcommittee members that the laboratory was able to address satisfactorily, and there were no recommendations made. So the review of the validations was approved.
Okay. Do I have a motion to accept? Any questions for Dr. Corrado? Alrighty, no questions. So may I have a motion to accept the forensic biology subcommittee report?
This is Kristen, and I'll move.
Alrighty, and a second, please.
George Maha will second.
Alrighty, Ms. Taylor, can you please call the roll call vote?
Mr. Bates,
Aye.
Trell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cox,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Dr. Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Schelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Xerxes,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Dr. Edinburgh, can you present the toxicology subcommittee report, please?
Yes, we should go while the presenting is good. We had the meeting yesterday. We reviewed the validation package for the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs by LCMS-MS and the gamma hydroxy GHB by LCMS-MS. The validations were approved with one recommendation to experimentally determine the limits of detection of each of the methods presented versus using an administratively determined concentration. Then the validation plan for the automated liquid handling system and the validation were presented, and those were approved. And then the validation plan for both the quantitative and qualitative fentanyl derivative by LCMS-MS were presented and approved. And the final order of business was several methods that are in development were discussed, including the barbiturates quantitative by LCMS-MS, cannabinoids extraction by the automated liquid handling system, a miscellaneous basic drug quantitation by LCMS-MS, and finally the flualprazolam quantitation by LCMS-MS. All of those actions were discussed and approved by the subcommittee.
All right, thank you, Dr. Edinburgh. Any questions for Dr. Edinburgh? All righty, hearing no questions, is there a motion to accept the toxicology subcommittee report?
This is Maureen. I move to accept.
Second, please.
This is Barry, I second.
All right, Ms. Taylor, can you take the roll call vote, please?
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Latrell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Shelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Zersi,
Aye.
motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next on the agenda is the Division of Technical Services updates. And first up, we have Ms. Alcaloman, the Director of Technical Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to get my screen up if you'll bear with me one moment.
Surely.
Are you able to see the slide, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
This is Jamie. We're actually seeing your presenter view.
That's what I thought could happen. Give me 1 second, please.
Okay.
How's that?
That's good. Much better.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know, Jamie. Good morning. I guess it's still morning, everyone. Appreciate you all being on the call. Nice to see some of your faces again. Unfortunately, when we have our camera on, we lose some bandwidth. So you just see some talking head still pictures. Just want to give you a few updates. Some of these things were covered by Director Jackson, so I'll just touch on those briefly. And for the technical services staffing update, we have had a postdoctoral fellow / research specialist position that we had available through grant funding for our QTOF automation project. That was on hold a little while, but we are fortunate that we were able to post that and recently filled that position, and that candidate is now in the background check. So we are thrilled that we will be able to continue with that research project in the upcoming months. I am very pleased to announce that we successfully completed our on-site surveillance through ANAB remotely. That was the 3rd week of May. That was a very interesting experience, but one that we are glad we were able to accomplish. We knew that we were having that remote assessment or that on-site surveillance for quite some time, and right around the same time they were going to make their travel arrangements was when the COVID-19 restrictions started coming in and everything. So probably a week before most things started to shut down or have positive COVID cases, we had a call with our ANAB program manager and our lead assessor, and they had asked if we would be willing to be the first laboratory system that would do it remotely. We certainly were willing. It was quite a learning experience trying to update pretty much every piece of paper we have into ShareFile, which is the application that they use for data review. But that went pretty much as smooth as it could have. We did successfully transition to the most updated accreditation criteria at that time, which is the ISO 17025:2017 and the accreditation requirements 3125. Prior to that, because risk assessment is a big portion of the new 17025 or the revised 17025, we did have some risk assessment training that was originally supposed to be in December of 2019, but it got pushed to January of 2020. And we, I think about 15 of us had that training, if my memory is serving with that number. And that was run by A2LA. So that helped us launch our risk assessment protocols or strategies for DFS. As Director Jackson pointed out, we do have the forensic training section, and the 100th Forensic Science Academy did graduate a week early because of COVID-19. It was supposed to be that first Friday in April. They did have a small ceremony, just most of them here, they are socially distanced in their graduation picture outside. So that was great that we could have them finish. So a lot of praise goes to those instructors and the DFS staff that made sure that they worked night and day so they could wrap up all the testing and mock crime scenes to have these folks back home with their families in time. The 101st session, which would have been going on right now, was canceled, and those students will become the 102nd session, and now the 101st session is set to start in the fall. Director Jackson also touched on our JAG continuation funding, so that allows us to have another part-time trainer with us in the forensic training section to continue with the different short courses and also assist with the Forensic Science Academy. So COVID-19 was an excellent opportunity for us to move into some online instruction. That's not traditionally how we have conducted our courses in forensic training, because we thought we needed to be very hands-on with photography and crime scene investigation. And our staff really embraced technology and these opportunities to just change, and were able to offer basic crime scene photography, our crime scene investigation overview, as well as the annual laboratory capabilities and lab update, all online. So they did use Google Meet. For those of you who were on our SAC subcommittees earlier this morning and yesterday, that's the communication application that we used as opposed to this Cisco WebEx, which we're using today. So they were able to troubleshoot a lot of different things as far as bandwidth, and that's how we've learned that sometimes shutting off our cameras helps, and different things with microphones and headsets. So it has been a great learning experience for all of us. We were fortunate to receive a lot of positive critiques and feedback, which we have been implementing further change with. And they did resume in-person classes last week. So they are excited about now moving forward, having a mix of both online and in-person instruction. As you all are dealing with it, so are we. COVID-19 has given us a lot of opportunities to look at what we're doing and see how we can change to adapt to this new environment. Evidence receiving, again, they encourage folks, our customers, to mail in evidence when feasible. We're certainly requiring face masks and having appointments so we can be sure that we are maintaining appropriate physical distance. Submission of the RFLEs by email or fax certainly helps minimize time in the laboratory. As far as staff goes, we've had a lot of opportunities to try to telework between COVID-19 and last minute closures due to the recent riots that have happened here in the city of Richmond. So we have a lot of educational resources that we've gathered throughout the community and used Google Drive to make sure all our staff have access to them, whether it's free webinars about different topics from testimony to anything that could be specific to your scientific discipline, and just keeping folks aware of those different opportunities so that we can have them working. And those came in very handy even before we had expanded our ability to telework when it came to actual case file documentation at home. You all have heard me talk a lot about Qualtrics throughout the time that we spend together. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, Qualtrics is our quality management software. So it will retain all of our documentation as far as manuals, the quality manual, and it tracks all the revisions for us. But that is where our folks need to go to see different procedures. We have implemented different tests. We have annual civility in the workplace training or disaster awareness training. So we are able to administer those tests and track that everyone has taken it through Qualtrics. So when we have to log into Qualtrics, which you need to do to use some of the functionality, you have to have a certain amount of licenses. And the company was very agreeable at the beginning of COVID-19 and temporarily gave us more concurrent licenses so that we could have multiple folks or more folks on the system at one time, which was really helpful in getting those trainings completed and, again, opportunities for teleworking for our staff. We do have a grant application that's in the works, and that is through being offered through the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and it's coronavirus emergency supplemental funding. And so what we also have learned is there are ways that we could use less paper and continue our operations, especially when maybe one laboratory is closed, but not all of them. And certainly for breath alcohol and forensic training, where they can provide training remotely, or breath alcohol is going into the field and different locations throughout the state, and they could still maintain and certify the instruments and not need to be present in the office. So we're trying to apply for this grant funding so that we could have mobile hotspots maybe, and move more toward paperless instrument certifications, as well as improve some of the equipment that could be used for online course delivery. So really, that is all I have for you, and I'm going to turn it over to the chemistry program manager, Ms. Weimer, unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Elka, and good morning, everyone. I am Robin Weimer, and I'm going to be giving you the chemistry program update. We're going to be talking about controlled substances, but we're going to first talk about trace evidence. So our trace evidence staff were able to gather together at a statewide section meeting at the beginning of this year in January. There were two separate explosives demonstrations. The first was given at the Virginia State Police, where they showed us how they disrupt explosive devices and render them safe. The second was at the Radford Armory, where we were able to tour their ammunitions plant and see how explosives were manufactured. This also allowed an opportunity for a lot of group discussion, and we were able to make some progress on some key directions that I'm going to be talking about in a little bit as well. We look forward to online symposium in 2 weeks from now that will be focused on the current trends in forensic trace analysis. This will cover topics in primer residue, paint, glass, and tape. Those certainly aren't all of our trace evidence subdisciplines, but it covers many, and I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to still learn given the current environment we're not allowed to gather. We are still working on our NIJ grant that's focused on fire debris. This is specific to fire debris interpretation using quantitative measures of chromatographic features with the application of ACE-V methodology. And the goal, again, just a reminder, is to minimize the subjectivity and standardize the approach. At this point, all of the laboratory, analytical, and statistical work has been completed, and they're working. The examiner would actually use this in their workflow. This provided training 8 hours in December, an additional hour in May of 2020, and we look forward to expecting additional training in the future for both internal use and external. As for the trace evidence trainees, in November of 2019, we had 2 trainees complete training, one in the Eastern Laboratory on paint training and the other in the Central Laboratory on hair training. That one in the Central Laboratory, began tape training in March of this year. We were also able to fill my vacated position and with a fiber trainee, which started in April of 2020. Recently, we had a policy notice that was addressing fire debris cases. When an ignitable liquid is present, it is volatile and readily evaporates, and therefore needs to be an airtight container, which we've used lined paint cans for this purpose. Recently, we identified a light to medium aromatic product that was found in certain cans, which upon further investigation were marketed as manufactured from recycled materials. We were unable to identify these cans to a single manufacturer, or in June issued a policy notice that required submission of control cans, corresponding sizes with each case, and have also instituted a quality assurance process for our cans within the laboratory. In the very near future, the biggest change that we have is we will be soon implementing a report wording change for trace evidence. Not all comparisons are created equally, and some associations have more significance than others. For example, if I were to find blue cotton fibers at a crime scene and compared those to a suspect, given the popularity of denim and jeans in the community, that association would be less significant, for example, than a more rare fiber of a more uncommon color or shape. So what we're trying to do is provide clear communication and qualify associations appropriately. This is going to be applicable to all trace evidence examinations that involve a comparison. And the purpose is not only to provide clear communication, because sometimes language still doesn't come across clearly, but also provide context to allow that better understanding of the strength of the conclusion, and then describe why we provided that level of association. I mentioned levels because we are going to have 7 levels of association, 4 of which are when an association is made. The first and strongest would be the physical/fracture match, and the least strong will be the association with limitations. There's also inconclusive, which means no association or elimination, and then 2 different exclusion options. So these levels will be the levels that will be incorporated onto our reports. Our current reports have the top 3 bullets, so the methods utilized, the results, and the conclusion. Those will remain on the new reports. However, we will be adding the level of association, why that level was chosen. If more than one association is present and it increases the significance, we will add additional language to explain that. And then you will also see the key to explain all the levels and what they mean. And that key is there to provide that context so that you see your level of association or the level of association that was assigned to this association in context relative to the others that were options. So just as an example, you will see the methods. So items 1 and 2 were examined visually and using tests X, Y, and Z. So you see the tests that we perform on which specific items. And you will see the results and interpretations. So they were consistent in which particular properties. Our conclusion, it was concluded that this item 1 originated from item 2 or another source of the same properties. In this example, I just used a level 3 association, and then we explain why we chose that particular association level. Underneath that, you would see the terminology key, where all possible levels will be included for that context component. And here's the wording that you would see for level 3, but you would see also the wording for level 1, 2, 4, etc. So we've been working on that, the report wording for trace evidence for some time. The statewide section meeting in January gave us an opportunity to gather and discuss it further. We're making very good progress, and we're pretty close to implementation within probably the next month. Shifting gears now to controlled substances. They too were able to gather in December of 2019 for their statewide section meeting. This was held not only with controlled substances, but jointly with the toxicology section, as well as staff from the OCME, or the Office of Chief Medical Examiner. This was a grant-funded symposium that focused on the synthesis and pharmacology of novel synthetic opioids. They too will have an opportunity to do an online symposium that's focused on current trends in seized drug analysis. Their week is scheduled for the last week of October. However, the schedule has not yet been posted. So we don't know how many hours yet or what that content will be. But this is certainly an opportunity that we look forward to using in a time when we're less able to gather. For controlled substances trainees in the Northern Laboratory, 2 completed training in November of 2019 and 1 completed in May of 2020. There is another trainee that's expected to complete their training by the end of this week. In the Western Laboratory, there are 2 trainees that completed training in April of 2020, and we just had another position filled, and this is their first week this week. In the Eastern Laboratory, 1 trainee is expected to complete their training first or second week of August 2020. We continued to outsource our cases to NMS at the beginning of this year, and as of April, we outsourced approximately 4,100 cases. The average NMS turnaround time was 21 days, and set a minimum requirement of at least 1% of outsourced cases being reanalyzed for QA purposes. We've analyzed roughly 1.6 to the 2%, but the vast majority of those were for court purposes. We have not closed that. While we stopped cases for outsourcing to NMS, we have kept the contract open, and we will continue to monitor based on case submissions and backlog and our budget constraints to see if we need to continue to send any. In January, we recommended 11 compounds to the Board of Pharmacy for expedited scheduling. The March meeting was canceled due to COVID, so those compounds weren't considered until their May meeting, and they are still pending final approval. At the end of last year and the beginning of this year, we started to look at ways to improve our efficiency with regards to methamphetamine purity determinations. In the Virginia Code, section 18.2-248, there are specific weight thresholds that, and so we reached out to Commonwealth's attorneys in areas within the state that prosecute the majority of our methamphetamine cases, and found that more often than not, they were not pursuing the increased penalty. Therefore, the purity determination, which we would have done automatically once we met those weight thresholds, were not necessary. So in January of this year, we notified our customers of a policy change where if that weight threshold is met, the net weight falls within the established weight threshold, we will not automatically perform that purity test, but we will indicate that on our report. So an example of the report wording is at the bottom of this slide. If a purity test is required, the Commonwealth attorney can submit a written request either at the initial submission or upon a resubmission, and we will perform that purity test. If we from January 1st to June 30th of 2020 versus the same time period in 2019, we've seen a 62% decrease in the number of methamphetamine purity determinations that we've had to perform. So this is certainly an area we've been able to. The majority of our changes, however, have been a result of the marijuana and hemp. We have validated and implemented a chemical test that can be used as a field test in a field test kit. This is not a replacement to the Duquesnoy-Levine field test, but rather a supplement. The Duquesnoy-Levine field test, prior to the need to distinguish hemp from marijuana, could be used to identify cannabis, and then it would have indicated marijuana. But once we need to distinguish hemp from marijuana, the Duquesnoy-Levine field test will just indicate cannabis, and then the 4AP test, or also referred to as the Swiss test or the cannabis typification field test, can be used to then distinguish types of cannabis, marijuana from hemp. So this is not a test that allows the determination of the percent delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol or THC, but rather comparison of the concentration of THC to cannabidiol or CBD. If the concentration of THC is greater than CBD, generally that color would turn blue and would indicate marijuana. However, if the concentration of CBD was greater than the concentration of THC, the result would be a pink color, and that would typically indicate hemp. So since November, DFS has distributed about 16,000 of these kits to our customers across the state. We also partnered with Virginia State Police and produced a training video on the use of the cannabis typification field test kit. We not only posted it on our website, but also on YouTube as an educational resource. We also had to change our analytical scheme for cannabis plant material. So the new scheme looks like this, where we would do macroscopic and microscopic examination, followed by thin layer chromatography or TLC. The 4AP test would be optional and followed by our semi-quantitative test using gas chromatography flame ionization detector with mass spectrometry method. So that semi-quant method, we would compare we'd be looking at the THC concentration versus our internal standard, or the ratio of that compared to a standard run that day, and we would look for an administrative threshold set at 2. If our ratio is greater than 2, we would report it as marijuana. If our ratio was less than 2, we would not be able to distinguish hemp from marijuana. We would report it as not determined. And these are the types of cases that, if requested, we would have to do the full quantitation to determine that percent THC concentration. In January, the semi-quantitative GCFID-MS test was validated, finished validation, and was implemented. And we also suspended our policy that would no longer analyze simple possession cases without a court order. In April of 2020, we had our agency bill, Senate Bill 646, which was carried by Senator Surville, and this amended the Virginia Code to clarify the term tetrahydrocannabinol to specifically Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. This was helpful for us, as was that it allowed DFS to determine the proper method to measure the concentration of THC. It said that the THC concentration could be determined using post-decarboxylation testing or other equivalent method, and the method shall consider the potential conversion to THC-A or tetrahydrocannabinolic acid to THC. That would mimic the federal language. That bill had an emergency clause, and so when it was signed by the governor, was immediately effective, whereas in the spring of 2020, House Bill 972 and Senate Bill 2 passed with an effect 1st, 2020, and this new law would remove hashish oil, or the oils that contain greater than 12% THC, from the Virginia Code. It decriminalized simple possession of marijuana for adults and provides a civil penalty of no more than $25. And under the new law, there is a rebuttable presumption that a person who possesses no more than 1 ounce of marijuana possesses it for purpose. Given these legislative changes, we reinstituted our policy requiring a court order for simple possession offenses occurring after July 1. This is not applicable to juvenile cases or possession with intent to distribute. And we did recommend in that policy notice that residues and edibles not be submitted unless other drugs are suspected, because we're not able to determine with these materials if any cannabinoids are hemp-derived or marijuana-derived. We've also had a number of new validations that have been a result. So we've talked about the first 2 with subcommittee meetings yesterday, and that was about non-plant material matrices using the semi-quantitative test, as well as evaluating drying and decarboxylation of plant material to move forward with full quantitative methods. There are 3 additional validations that we will be continuing to work through and foresee future subcommittee meetings to address those as well. Those are 2 full quantitation methods, one by HPLC or high performance liquid chromatography and the other by GCFID. and then a qualitative identification of THCA by tandem mass spectrometry, or LCMS-MS. So thank you in advance for the future subcommittee meetings that we will have as we continue to work through these validations. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. We're sanitizing our computer and switching presenters. So hi, I'm Sabrina Sillison. I'm here to talk to you about physical evidence program update. So staffing and latent prints and impressions, we have one person in recruit in our central lab. I believe they're doing interviews last week. And we have one in recruit in our western lab that is also doing interviews. We have one examiner in training in our central lab, one in our western lab, and one in our northern lab. The northern person should be done at the end of August, early September. Western is probably the end of the year, and central is towards the end of the year too as well. The department put out a policy notice for latent prints in the NGI system, which is the next generation identification system, which is the FBI AFIS system. So they had an upgrade in 2013 that made it difficult to determine the latent prints and marry the latent prints in the system with the unsolved latent print database, determine which case those latent prints belong to, and we got a potential association for a new arrest. So it was very difficult to track down those cases and find the correct prints to compare. So we requested the whole database from 2013 prior be removed. And if our customers wanted those cases relaunched, we could resubmit the evidence and we would relaunch a search. To my knowledge, we've only had a few interested in that, but we're not even sure if the FBI did delete all of those prints because we keep having them come up in our queues. So, but we did request to our customers resubmit the cases and we can relaunch the searches, which is what the FBI actually recommends too, because the system was upgraded and the matchers are better. Our Mayo system allowed for remote working. During the pandemic, our examiners were able to conduct examinations at home as well as verifications because the system is networked and they just needed their VPN access to access the system and all of the images in it. So that was very useful for allowing them to work from home. They could put the prints in while they were in the lab doing the processing, scanning them in, photographing them in, and then they could do the comparison at home. Our files and toolmark section, Linda talked about our staffing challenges and people in training. We have people in training in all of our locations and we're down people in Northern. So there's still one person. They're in recruit in the Northern lab. I understand when a new trainee accepted the offer, they start in August. So that'll be an 18-month training program to get them up and running. We have 2 examiners in training. So that takes up a lot of time of qualified examiners training new people, as well as one in Western and one in Eastern starts August 10th. We did just complete training for 2 NIBIN examiners, so one in Eastern and one in Central. So they're clicking away at that backlog for the NIBIN cases. And Linda talked about our grant we submitted for 3D imaging. We are still in the process of validating our current system. So the grant included the purchase of 3 additional systems, the Cadre system. We're hoping we can get it up and running if we do get the grant. We're doing the equipment verification, which requires numerous scans of standards to see what the threshold is for that value of no-go. Once we close that, then we're going to collect scans of cartridge cases from CTS tests so that we can create sample sets and the examiners conduct 3D virtual microscopy on those comparisons. The grand future is we would have these in all laboratories and examiners could conduct comparisons on screen and they'd be able to do that at home
possibly. Also, verifications could be done in other labs. If an examiner was working in Central and they needed a verification and no one was here, they could have an examiner in Western conduct that verification on a 3D image. That's well into the future grand plan. This is the proposal. We're going to purchase 3 new scanners, and we're going to implement comparisons and verifications on the 3D images. And the goal is to determine if the evaluation of change of opinion occurs more often in blind verification, to see if that process is worth the extra time and effort that we put into doing it. So that's the goal of the research plan. I do believe we will find out in September, October if we were awarded the funds for that. NIBIN, we are continuing with a lot of NIBIN cases. The ATF has their minimum required operating standards. They did audit us last year and then sent out a request in June for additional turnaround time data to see if we've improved. We have improved greatly in the time it takes for us to notify our customer of a potential association. We're still struggling with the amount of time it takes us to get the firearm into the system because of various issues with other sections. If it goes to latency DNA first, that delays the time it gets into the system. And also we tend to prioritize homicides, assaults, not just as the gun comes in, that one goes out first. So we do prioritize based on crime type. So that causes some delays in what goes in first. DME is doing really well. They are fully staffed and they're continuing to cross-train their staff. One is in training for computers and one is for mobile, and both of those should be done in September. So then they will have more capabilities to do different types of cases and keep whittling down their backlog. They did attend a cybercrime, the Virginia Cybercrime Initiative Conference in 2020 of March. They were actually on site for this one. It was very beneficial. The DME staff presented an overview of the section and their capabilities as well as unusual cases. They were able to attend other presentations on virtual currency, first responders, dark webs. One of the panel discussions that Jesse, the supervisor, found interesting was skill sets for hiring, kind of what agencies are looking for skill sets for digital multimedia evidence staff. They really enjoyed the great networking opportunity because they can understand the legal community challenges and the Virginia code and the case law, and the attorneys can understand the technical challenges. Unfortunately, no meetings additionally have been scheduled due to the pandemic, but they are hopeful to have more meetings. And for those who don't know, the Virginia Cybercrime Initiative was a group of attorneys as well as investigators and examiners trying to determine who does what in the state of Virginia and how to best use the services, as well as to understand the Virginia code and the case law related to digital multimedia evidence examination. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Good morning, everyone. So in the toxicology section, due to pandemic type of stuff, the Society of Forensic Toxicologists, the SOFT conference was canceled. That was scheduled to be in California, I believe, this year in the fall. But now they're potentially talking about a virtual format where they have the presentations they would have had be presented electronically. But that's still up in the air right now. Some of the updates on some of our systems, we did purchase the Hamilton automated liquid handling systems. We have both of the opioids and cocaine method and the fentanyl derivative methods are verified on there. Our internal training is actually just taking place this week and next week, and we're hoping to have everything rolling, hopefully by early August, have some of our first batches extracted on that system. Some of our new methods, this was all discussed with the subcommittee meeting yesterday, as Dr. Edinburgh talked about. Some of the big ones were GHB and also the fentanyl derivatives by the solid phase extraction. That allows us to put that method onto the Hamilton system. Some of the future methods we're looking at, as again talked about with the subcommittee, the barbiturates, the miscellaneous base drugs, and the flu appraisal and quantitation. Section meeting, this had already been discussed by Ms. Weimer, and it was a combined meeting up in the Manassas lab, and the pretty broad scope of topics related to the fentanyls and opioid compounds. Some new instrumentation we received, part of our budget for this past go round. We had the new Agilent 6470 LC-MS systems installed in each location and in our research section. And we also updated our UV-Vis spectrophotometers to the Agilent Carry 60, and those are installed, and both of those types of instruments are being actively used in the sections. Staffing wise in toxicology, we had a forensic scientist in our eastern section finish training. We had a toxicologist in our northern section finish training. We also have a toxicologist starting in our Roanoke lab about 2 weeks from today. And then we also have a recruit in the central tox. One of them has been filled, and that person is in the background. And the other one is one of the ones I believe that's currently frozen with the hiring freeze. Breath alcohol, we've been pretty well fully staffed and pretty stable for a long time. Some of the grant proposals that Director Jackson discussed, the cannabinoids grant. The goal of this grant is to kind of expand the scope of what we're testing. We're going to start to include some of the other cannabinoids that are naturally occurring and starting to be sort of concentrated in some materials that are being produced. We're also going to look at different extraction techniques, different substrates, and also different instrumental techniques to see if we can improve the chromatography, improve the detection limits of these cannabinoids, and then also be able to validate this on our sort of fully automated system within the Hamilton system. And then we have the competitive Coverdell grant, which we are aiming to hire a forensic toxicologist trainee. And the idea being that we put this person in a location where we really need to expand our caseload capabilities, reduce the turnaround time, and also help to cover some of those court cases that are potentially being continued to delays with availability of our toxicologists. In our breath alcohol section, when the COVID pandemic hit and we had a lot of our closures, we did send out some guidance on April 2nd to all of our users as far as what they can do with the instrumentation, with their practices to minimize their exposure and minimize cross-contamination on the instrumentation. Main focuses are for the officers is wearing gloves, also trying to maintain the social distancing. And also too is our practice prior to this had been that the officer would use the same mouthpiece for both subject breath samples. In this one, we just said, just start using a new one each time, disposing of those mouthpieces. And then we also provided them some guidance on hand sanitizer and cleaning of the instrumentation and cleaning around the instrumentation, and how they can utilize those to protect themselves, but also minimize effects on the test. Within breath alcohol, like Director Jackson said, we expanded out our online recertification due to the fact that we couldn't do these in person. We want to make sure we had continuity of operations for tests and operators being functional. So we expanded it out to allow for them to take it. Typically, the online certification was limited to active operators. They had to have an active evidential test within the last 6 months out to a year. We had also explored expanding out to 2 years. To allow them to test in there. In-person training, we had canceled that right around mid-March when everything else closed down. We just actually had our first basic class here in Richmond on June 22nd. We limit the class size to 10 students. That allows us to maintain the 6-foot separation between everybody. And we've reorganized all of the classroom and the laboratories. And then we are just starting in-person recertifications. We've had 2 conducted recently, one out in Bristol and one in Virginia Beach, with very good success and being able to maintain all of the recommendations for separation and face masks and everything. And again, with the closures and everything, we're still able to maintain all of our instrumentation. Had no instruments disabled during this time period. As far as the instruments go, we are still in the process of enhancing the instruments. We're really close to completion on this one. And we're aiming for late July to really pick up the pace of getting more instruments enhanced and potential for subcommittee meetings on that. enhancement and validation process. Revisiting some of the statistics, again, you saw massive decreases in March and April for the evidential breath test, and you see it in May and June. Anecdotally, this is related to some DMV statistics where they were seeing decreased amount of traffic in general for those time periods as well. As far as comparing to the toxicology side, we didn't see as noticeable of a decrease in the breath or in the blood test as compared to the breath test. We saw maybe a 10 to 15% reduction as compared to over a 50% reduction in breath tests. So in the fall, where are we at here? We had training, or actually, yeah, late 2019, we had 4 trainings, one at each lab for the attorneys and judges. It was 4 hours with 2 hours for breath alcohol and 2 hours for toxicology. We actually had a really good turnout for that. We had a lot of good exposure for the defense bar and judges that may not have had a chance to see some of these things as compared to the Commonwealth attorneys that typically get exposure to these topics. And so we had a really good positive reception, a lot of good interactions with the attorneys and the judges. So it worked out for us. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions on toxicology? All right, turn it over to Mr. Jenkins.
Good morning, everybody. Brad Jenkins, I'm the Forensic Biology Program Manager, and here is my update. Staffing, we're doing really well in biology. I think one of our earlier SAC meetings, we had close to 12 people in training. So now greatly reduced, but in Central, we have 1 person in training in casework. He has come to us from Texas. We have 1 person in training from the data bank. We were able to hire an internal person for that position. We have 1 person in training in casework, and that was also an internal hire out in Western. 1 in recruit in Northern, and Eastern is fully staffed. We're doing some in-house training, and we're trying to bring YSTRs online. And YSTRs, if you're not a DNA person, this allows us to look at male DNA. Well, we've got Western online for that, and we want to bring Eastern online next. We're already doing it here in Central and in the Northern lab. And so we have 9 examiners in training throughout the state. Western is online. They had one of their examiners pass all their training requirements a couple weeks ago. StarMix deployment. So StarMix is a name for a fancy software that allows us to do calculations on DNA mixtures, how common and how rare they are. We've completed 2 in-house training sessions for our staff. We're doing performance checks on the software in the regional labs as well as Central. And we have the training, and the first sets of our examiners have started. We're training 3 to 4 examiners in each one of our laboratories on the use of this software. So validation update, our StarMix validation is in a draft form. It's being reviewed. And like I said earlier, performance checks are being done by the other laboratories nearing completion. We brought our YSTRs online on a different instrument. That instrument's called the 3500, and the subcommittee reviewed that work earlier today, so I do appreciate their time. The next validation projects that we're getting ready to get started on is that we're looking at a new real-time PCR instrument, and this allows us to figure out how much DNA is in the sample, or human DNA is in the sample. A new DNA quantitation kit, we're looking at the Promega kit, a new YSTR kit that we are evaluating, and we're having some additional studies done on Casework Direct. Casework Direct is a chemistry that allows us to screen sexual assault cases quickly. And so we put that online for a while, and now we're just tweaking the validation on that so we can make it more efficient. We were awarded a DNA research grant. We're looking at an automated or semi-automated way to do a differential extraction Differential extraction is an extraction involving sperm, and it takes a lot of time to do this. And so if you have a lot of rate cases to process like we do, we're trying to find a more automated fashion to do this with robotics. That second bullet is a little outdated. We had a postdoctoral fellow hired. He has resigned, but the project is underway, and we will look to refill his position. External training, we did not do, so the DNA examiners are for continuing education every year. We usually do that in the spring, but that was canceled because of the COVID outbreak. And what we have planned is that we're going to attend the Promega meeting, and it's remotely in the fall. And so all the examiners in the state, there's about 60 of us, will sign up to attend the meeting, and the presentations will be taped, so we all don't have to be at the meeting at the same time as being offered. They'll be archived, so we have a number of months to be able to look at the presentations. So that'll take care of the continuing education for the staff this year, and we will not need to travel. We'll also save some money compared to what we were going to do, so that's good news. New QAS. QAS stands for Quality Assurance Standards. And so the DNA world has changed their quality assurance standards. They just went into effect July 1. We have edited our manuals, and we're ready to go with that. We're going to rip the Band-Aid off very quickly, and we had scheduled an external audit right after the new standards went into effect. It's supposed to be this week. But because of COVID, we are rescheduling. The Army Crime Lab is coming here to do an external audit. We're looking at that date. Databank. In the databank, we were the first state to have a DNA databank. And with that proud tradition, we have elected to keep paper records up until now. And so our databank analysts have been trying to decipher the handwriting of prison guards for 20 plus years as they collect samples from convicted offenders, and that is not an easy task. And so we have decided to modernize our DNA databank with a pre-log and an electronic portal for submission. So the jails, prisons, etc., can log into this pre-log. They can check to see if we have the sample here at the databank already, and then they will enter their samples electronically, type the sample names in. We're also hoping we'll have a search mechanism that can auto-populate the data fields for them. So we're happy about that. It is entering a stage that we can do some staging environment in the next couple of weeks to test it, see how it's working. It will require some minor legislative changes. The state code of Virginia refers law enforcement to other websites to check to see if we have a databank sample. So we need to edit those code sections, and CACHA has already been aware of that. We have one piece of databank legislation last year. It was introduced, I think, by Delegate Jenkins. That he or she is of no relation to me. But this clarifies that we'll be allowed to keep a DNA sample from a person who is arrested for a violent felony if that person has another offense in their record. A qualifying misdemeanor offense, for example, would be allowed to keep that sample. We are an automatic expungement state. And so we collect samples from arrestees, but about 50% of our arrestees are cleared the next month. And so we'd like to have legislation in place to allow us to keep those samples if we can. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you all from the Division of Technical Services for your updates. The next order of business is the review of serology cases from old business, and that as well is Mr. Jenkins.
You thought you were done with me, but I'm back. Rich, can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, I had Alka put the new PowerPoint up.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Review of serology cases. This has been a project we've been working on for 4 years now, and I think we're bringing it to a close. So this is probably one of my final reports that we will have on this topic. So I'm do a little background. We have new people on our Scientific Advisory Committee, so I'm just going to do a little bit of background to bring everybody up to speed. In 1982, we had a rape homicide. That was prior to DNA testing, and we had ABO typing results in the file that it looked to be that it eliminated that potential suspect. For some reason, they were not reported in the certificate of analysis. There was a trial. The person was convicted largely based on bite mark evidence. The victim had a bite mark or an alleged bite mark on a part of her body, and they a number of dentists compared this back to the individual. We had a request that came in from one of the Innocence Projects to perform DNA testing in this case, and we performed DNA testing in 2016, and he was eliminated, and he was pardoned subsequently after that. In the beginning, this is some of the newspaper articles at the time, and then that information was also what I just told you was public knowledge, and it was in the newspapers as well. It was a Harvard case out of the worked in our Norfolk laboratory. So yeah, everybody can read that. A former forensic serologist identified a blood type in semen left at the crime scene that supported the innocence of Harwood, but it was not reported. And apparently it did not come out in testimony either, according to the newspaper article. What was serology and what were we doing back at that time? We were a state crime lab system starting in 1972. We were statewide, and we were accredited in 1989. And serology we did that type of testing from 1972 until 1994. And in 1994, it was replaced with DNA testing. I started here in 1994, so this predates me, and I'm not I was not trained in conventional serology, so I had some other folks that had to do these reviews. It's typically called ABO testing and enzyme and serum protein testing. They have different abbreviations that you can see there: PGEM, PEPA, HP, GCTF for blood. So there's different types of enzyme tests for blood and other body fluids. This is what the typing results look like. If you look in the right-hand corner, you see an AB and EL in cursive. That's absorption elution. Across the top of the sheet are numbers. They refer to item numbers in the case file. And down the left side of the sheet, you see a benzidine test, phenolphthalein, precipitin test. Those are different types of tests for blood. A/C, B/D, those are different blood typing results. And the individuals or the scientists would write their typing results. You can see the red ink there, record what the results were. And this particular examiner, after they tested the cuttings, they would actually tape the cuttings down into the case file. And so that's what that red box represents. And not all examiners did this, but this led us into post-conviction DNA testing, where we completed one of the largest projects in North America, testing over 800 cases for post-conviction DNA testing. Review design. And so we're trying to see, why was this result in that file and for some reason not reported? And do we have a bigger problem here? Are there other that would be similar? And so we looked at 100 reports from 2 labs. So we wanted to look at least 200 reports. The Eastern lab is where this case originated from that I was speaking of. We also picked the Northern laboratory. We had a number of examiners online up there with serology testing at the time. We looked at 101 cases that represented 110 reports in Eastern. We looked at 70 cases in Northern, and that represented over 100 reports in the Northern laboratory. The reason there's more reports, sometimes there's multiple reports in a case. And so a case may have, it has at least 1 report. Some may have 2 or 3 or 4 or more. This captured the work from 18 different scientists from the 1972 timeframe to the 1990s. And so we wanted to see a wide range of work to see if we had what issues may be out there. We also looked at 15 post-conviction cases, and we had 3 cases added to the project by an attorney request. Sent out to individuals, prosecutors, defense attorneys, etc. And those 3 cases, they were asked to do reviews on those. Cases are going to be reviewed independently by 2 of our DFS, means Department of Forensic Scientists, Department of Forensic Science scientists, trained in conventional serology. And so we still have some older scientists here that were so happy working here, they did not want to leave. And hence they got to review some of these cases. And they actually worked some of these cases all those years ago. And so they had that knowledge that they could look at the case file to see if there were issues with it. 20% of the cases were reviewed by an outside reviewer. Then an internal committee was put together by myself and 2 scientists, and we recommended cases for possible future action or notification. Any of those cases we found, we were going to send those to our outside reviewer for their review. And so 9 cases were sent out to the outside reviewer for her review as well. This is really what we're looking for, and I already alluded to this earlier, that cases will potentially exculpatory testing results in the notes, but not reported in the certificates of analysis. We also want to see if there's potential masking. If people had the same, your victim and suspect had the same ABO testing, that would be an example of masking, and any other unusual observances that we would see in the files. Here are some general observations, and a lot of this was before we had reviewed procedures manuals, before accreditation, so there's a lot of history in these files over the years. There are no written conclusions comparing the results to reference samples until the late 1980s. And so it would simply list, if I was a suspect in a case, it would say, well, this is Brad's ABO type. I'm a B secretor. If there was evidence in the case, it would say the blood stain on the shirt was an A secretor. And so that would be listed in the certificate of analysis. There would be no conclusions comparing me to that stain until after the 1980s, when a report wording would say that I was eliminated as a possible contributor. So the readers had their own conclusions prior to that, or the conclusions were verbal in the courts if there was a court proceeding and a subpoena was issued. If I was included as a possible contributor, the next step would be to give a statistic about how common, how rare those ABO typing results are, but there are no statistical information in report published in the reports. Many of the files, you can see that the statistical estimates are written into the case notes and how the calculations are done, but they're not in the reports. So we have 2 situations there in the center where results were not reported out, and it's very common practice for that first bullet. And so known reference samples, if ABO testing was done on myself and I was a type B and the evidence produced no typing results at all, so there's nothing to compare me to, the report would be silent on my ABO typing result. And the reverse was somewhat also found, but not as often. If the evidence was typed and you had that the sperm evidence in the case was an O secretor, and the reference samples had not been typed yet, they had not been received, then the report would be silent if on the evidence sample. But we were happy to see that requests were in the report from known samples so comparisons could be completed. So in that example, we would ask for samples from a victim or a suspect so further comparisons would be completed in a subsequent report. Some body fluid screening results were in the notes, but they were not reported. And so they took some liberties to see what the type of case was and reported out the positive body fluid typing results that were relevant to that case. And many times this was saliva. So in a rape case, the examiner should be looking for sperm. If a female was attacked by a male, typically the sperm will be, or seminal fluid, semen, would be body fluid that they would be looking for. If there was a saliva swab submitted from someone as a reference sample, amylase would be done on that reference sample to confirm they had possible saliva on the sample. A number of cases, a large percentage of the cases exhibited potential masking, which was not unusual. That's one of the reasons why doing ABO testing, that they're not discriminating as the DNA tests. Even the early DNA tests 20 years ago were a lot more discriminating than the ABO typing results. Less and less of an issue because we're able to discriminate so many people with DNA testing results. So here we're actually going to give you a synopsis at the end on what cases we recommend for notification. In the upper left-hand corner, and what the issue was that the reviewers found in that case. And so we have a rape case, and ABO typing results were changed for some reason. 3 reports were issued. PERP stands for Physical Evidence Recovery Kit. That's a rape report in Virginia. There's also some blue jeans, and the examiner determined that the victim was a type A secretor. There was sperm on the jeans, there was sperm in the PERT kit. That was also a type A secretor. The suspect came in as a subsequent submission, so there was a second report. He was typed as a non-secretor. There was some communication from a doctor in the case file, and this was very unusual. We didn't really see any of this in any other case files. This doctor was not a doctor within our system, but it listed that the victim was type O. Evidence was resubmitted, and a third report was generated, and you can see how the typing results have changed. That now the genes have gone from A, O, secretor. In this case file. Oh, sorry.
We can't hear if Brad is still talking.
There are no amended reports in the case file. There's a trial and conviction of the individual.
Hey, Brad, I think you're going to have to back up a little bit because.
Yeah, we lost connection.
Oh. Are we back now?
I can hear you now.
I don't think you did it. Can you still see the slides? Can you still see the slides?
Yes. Yes.
So you can hear me and see the slides, correct? All right, I will continue on.
Yeah.
Hey, back up some more. Hang on. Hey.
To back, yeah.
All right, so this case, I think we got mostly through this slide. The long and short of it is
Change
that
slides.
the secretor types have changed. There are no amended reports that were issued. Typically, you would amend before the time of amended reports. And there was a trial and a conviction. This was one of the few cases, one of the only of these 9. This is the one case that had taped down evidence in that file. And so it was subjected to our post-conviction testing program. The person was eliminated with DNA testing, and he was given the court granted him a writ of actual innocence. Case files 2 and 3, or cases 2 and 3. These are control issues, and we saw these in these only 2 files. So ABO testing or always has controls. There's a positive control, negative control. There may be a substrate control. For different reasons, the controls in these 2 cases did not work properly. And as we all know, when the controls don't work properly, you don't report the results out. And so we're actually fine with the report wording in these cases. The first case, the controls did not work on the evidence. And so the vaginal swab and the genes were reported as inconclusive. There's also a hair comparison in the case where hairs on the genes were consistent with the suspect. These are the victim's genes. In the third case, the suspect sample was inconclusive. So for the reference samples, for that reference sample, the controls did not work properly. Sperm was found in the PERT kit or in the rape kit. Types foreign to the victim were noted. And in that case, another suspect standard was requested, which is the appropriate thing to do. If you can always go back and get another sample from the suspect. No other sample from that suspect was submitted that we can tell. Case number 4 is a homicide case. There's multiple control swabs. Some of them tested, theoretically, they should all test negative for blood. Some of them tested positive for blood. Some were inconclusive for blood. And again, some were negative for blood. When we have a control that fails, or a substrate control, we typically note that in the case file that one of the substrate controls was inconclusive. This examiner put no evidence of blood was reported for the control swabs. And so we would have just, in present day writing, we would have changed that wording a little bit. It really doesn't affect the results in the case. It has no real effect on the case that we could see. There was at least one negative control swab from each of the items of evidence. That was a common occurrence. The police collected the control swabs, and if they swab too close to the blood stain, there might be a trace amount of blood on that swab, and it would test positive. And so that was not unusual back in the day. And even when I was working cases in the early days, we saw that. Case number 5 is a rape case, and there was a stain. There's a perk in the case as well, but we're concentrating on a sheet. And for this observation, a stain on the sheet should have been reported inconclusive for saliva. There was sperm on the sheet, and one of the stains that was tested with the saliva stain had sperm in it. Sperm can actually, or seminal fluid can actually interfere with positive. And so that one stain should have been inconclusive for saliva. So the report read that no evidence of saliva was reported for all 10 stains. It should have said 9 stains, and 1 stain was inconclusive. It's no real bearing on the case in that they were looking for sperm, and it was an alleged sexual assault that occurred on the sheets. Reference samples from the victim and suspect were requested. They were not submitted as far as we can tell. Right, there's an unreported result, but there's no victim sample for comparison. That we did see. No sperm or body underpants, and however, the extra test type was an extra exposure. The test samples were requested from the victim from Harrison's. No samples were.
Brad, you're in and out.
Yeah, we're losing you again, Brad.
This is Katja. Alka said he's going to switch the audio onto the phone, so hopefully it won't be breaking up. So we'll just have to get Brad to back up. I think we'll finish going over number 6 before we go on to number 7.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Barron, if you can mute my computer, please, so that we don't get feedback, but we're having a little connectivity issue. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
So this is
How staticky. Music.
Yeah. Hey, Alka, why don't you hang up the phone and retry?
I'm not calling this. Dave, can you mute caller 6? There we go.
Yeah, that was Alka's call,
That was
I believe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think she needs to use a cell phone instead of that phone if she's in the director's conference room.
She is not.
There you go.
Are you there, Alka?
I am. We're trying to connect on another phone so that you can hear Brad. I don't know if we just completely lost wireless in there for a moment or what happened.
I'm going to mute your computer.
Okay, right now the phone died, so please don't mute the computer yet.
Okay.
The phone, landline's coming back.
Welcome to enter your attendee ID number followed by pound. If you do not know your attendee number, press pound to continue.
Am I on the call?
Yes, you are.
Alka, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Is that better?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Let me just try to get a screen up.
You're a little muffled, but you're...
This may be the best we can do. We've lost all kinds of connectivity. I apologize.
Do you want to send Brad over here and he can finish his presentation from over here?
That's entirely up to you. That's going to take longer.
Well, I think, Rich, is this manageable right the way we are right now?
I think so. Right now it's coming in fine.
Okay.
All right, everybody, can you see? I have case number 6 up there on the slide. Can you see the screen we're sharing?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to have Alka do the presentation while I do the words through the cell phone. So sorry about that. We'll see if this works out. I think we left off at case number 6 or case number 7, so this may be a repeat. But case number 6 was a rape case. There was an unreported result on the underpants, but no victim sample was submitted for comparisons. Also, there was no sperm identified on the underpants. And so that would be if a body fluid wasn't found, sperm was found on the underpants, they would not necessarily report out the ABO typing results because you don't really know what that is from. The suspect was typed as a type O secretor, and samples were requested from the victim for further comparisons, and no victim sample was submitted that we could tell. Yes, next slide, please. Case number 7 was a robbery and attempted rape case, and we believe we had a typo in the report. The PGM, that second bullet says PGM 2-1+. That's a type of serological screening result and our enzyme testing result. It was reported in the certificate as a 2+1+ for, item 11 from the shirt from the suspect. So the notes 2-1+, but in the report 2+1+. It has no bearing on the case here, in that the victim and suspect were both eliminated from that shirt, the blood stain on the suspect's shirt. There's about a number of other cases that were linked to this potential case. So multiple reports went out in this case, And in all the other subsequent reports, the report was reported correctly or corrected to 2 minus 1 plus. So you just have that one instance of the typo being in that first report. And again, it doesn't have an effect on the case, but we thought it was worth mentioning at this point. Next slide, please. This is a rape case where there are some ABO test results not reported. It is a case that is negative for seminal fluid and blood on some pants. And so again, that examiner would not necessarily report out those results if no body fluids were found on the pants. ABO is conducted on the pants and on 2 other areas of the pants as well. An A secretor was detected in 2 inconclusive results. Both the victim and the suspect are A secretors in this case. Next slide, please. Last slide. It's just a very odd conclusion wording, and I haven't seen in a very long time, but it's a rape, and then the victim got away from her attacker and killed her rapist, killed the suspect in the case. Conclusion statement that was used is no foreign types to the victim for the thigh sample, therefore the suspect could not be eliminated. But for the thigh sample, there were no results obtained. And so in theory, you wouldn't be able to eliminate anyone from that sample because no results were obtained from it. And so what she said is correct, but it's just worded very oddly. And so there also occurred in similar wording for 2 other stains on the comfort. 29 and 30, no results were obtained, and the wording in her report was both the victim and suspect cannot be eliminated. And so today's wording would be similar to the effect that no typing results were obtained for item 29, therefore no conclusions can be made about the victim or suspect as possible contributors. And so that's what we saw in that case. Next slide, please. So that was the end of the 5 cases. Our external reviewer and I were looking at these, and we thought notification was warranted in 5 of the cases. Case 2 and 3, those are the cases with the controls did not work properly. Case number 8 was a unreported result, but there's no body fluids on that item detected. And case number 9 was the case with the strange conclusion wording that we just spoke about. We also felt that notification would be necessary in case number 1. However, further review is unnecessary since this person has DNA testing has been conducted and he has been eliminated and a writ of actual innocence. So there's no other actions that can be done in that case. Notification is not recommended for the remaining 4 cases, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Next slide, please. Based on the current review, we found no duplication of the issue observed in that initial case, the Harwood case. No identification of any other isolated or systemic issues that would warrant continued review of additional cases. And so no further reviews are recommended at this point. Last slide, please. Final thoughts on the project and the kind of a path forward or for you to consider. Due to the limitations of serology, this is an area where the General Assembly since 2001 has provided for post-conviction DNA testing and a mechanism for writs of actual innocence when DNA testing has eliminated the individual. I alluded to earlier that we completed one of the largest post-conviction DNA testing programs in North America where over 860 cases were tested. Serology testing was performed in all of those cases, and we will continue to offer reviews upon request on a case-by-case basis when conviction information has been confirmed. Can you back up a slide? I want to add one more. And so of these, one important thing to keep in the back of your minds of what we're doing now, of these 9 cases, we only know that conviction information was confirmed in case number 1. And so the other 8 cases, we don't know if there was a conviction yet. And so that's the data that we are working on now. And so obviously we would only make these notifications if there was a conviction. and that information is not necessarily contained within our case files. That's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions if y'all have questions.
Brad, this is Kathy. I have a question.
Okay.
I guess just what you just said, I just want to confirm. So for those last 4 cases that you're not recommending anything, if you find out that someone was convicted, will you go back and look at that to make sure, or have you just closed that out? And my reason for asking that is I thought case 6 maybe had some information that I would maybe suggest looking at if you did find someone that was convicted for that case.
What we're recommending, even in those cases, if we confirm conviction information, we would not go back and offer any notification in those. Case 6, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. Do you want to? Can you bring it back up again? Alka's gonna bring the presentation back up so I can zip the case 6 again and see what it was.
Thank you. I didn't write down exactly. And it's possible I'm completely wrong as well. I had a question about it at the time.
I want to confirm it to make sure it's the case I'm thinking of, but. And so in this particular case, you brought up a good point. But this particular case, there was a request for a victim sample in the report, and no victim sample was ever submitted. And so had the victim sample come in, further comparisons would have been conducted on that underpants and everything else. And so that's why, because the victim sample was never submitted, no further action was thought to be the correct response for this case. So that's why we landed on that.
I guess my question is, if a type A was detected, and if if someone was convicted and they weren't type A, I mean, I understand without the victim, you wouldn't know if that type A, I guess, was from the victim or not. But I mean, maybe it would warrant notification or further looking into.
Yeah, be honest with you, I'd be happy to move that case to a notification category, just in an abundance of caution, that we can, if there is a conviction information that's confirmed here, we can certainly reach out to the parties and, either confirm this or offer if they need any additional testing. No sperm was also found on the clothing either, so that we don't really know what that ABO result is from. It could be from just her wearing the clothing. But with your recommendation, I'm fine to move that over into a notification category.
I appreciate that. I don't know if that's something you want to do, or if anyone else has any thoughts on that. I mean, maybe with the no sperm, it's sufficient to not be worried, but I think abundance of caution, yeah, I would say better safe than sorry.
And that's kind of that is the vein that we've taken with this. If you recall cases 2 and 3, Alka, can you back up? And so cases 2 and 3, the reviewers were perfectly fine with how these cases are reported, in that the controls failed and everything was reported in the reports. And so we saw no issue with these 2 cases. But in an abundance of caution, there's sperm identified in each case. If more testing is needed, we were going to notify these 2 cases as well. And so that was the whole overview of these cases, that we can make those types of notifications in an abundance of caution. And I would classify what you brought up, in that same vein.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad, for that review. So I believe you can help me out with this, Katya. So since this is a review by committee for the Scientific Advisory Committee, that we would seek a motion to recommend action according to the conclusions of the committee and to close out the review. So I guess if somebody can put forth a motion, as I understand it, to make notifications in cases 2, 3, 6, 8, and 9, if conviction information for suspects is confirmed, and make notification in those particular cases, and then we would close out the review of these serology cases. Is that, Katya,
Rich?
is that the direction?
Yeah,
that you
Rich,
wanna
this
go?
is Jamie.
Yeah.
Rich, this
Okay.
is Jamie.
Yes.
I don't think this was a committee assignment. I think this was an agency review. So would that make a difference?
Okay.
If on whether the SAC had to make any recommendations or anything?
And this is Katja. This was something that the agency undertook to do the serology case review. I think that we would like the SAC to make a recommendation for the board's consideration in terms of whether you agree that the notification in those 6 cases, and also whether you agree that that we can close out and not take any further action with respect to the serology case review, other than, as Brad indicated, if requested, we would review any specific cases, but not to have to do any additional review other than that.
So the SAC is reviewing the work of the department and recommending action to the board. To recommend action to the board to that they make notification in these 5 cases if conviction information for suspects is confirmed. Is that correct?
Yes, and if the committee agrees, then also to that would conclude the serology review.
Okay. Alrighty. Do I need to write this out for a clear motion?
I think what you stated previously is sufficient if the committee understands that.
Okay. Is that understood by the committee? Does that make sense to you, Jamie, or other people?
It makes sense to me.
Time's up.
This is less.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. This is George Maha. I agree. It makes sense.
Okay. So then, that being the motion, can we? Can I ask for I guess that's the motion. Can I ask for a second to the motion?
Kathy, I'll second it.
Okay. Alrighty, and then.
And who made the motion, if you could clarify?
Oh, yeah. I guess I can't make the motion, can I?
I was going to say, could you restate it in its entirety, if that's possible?
Now that would be a problem. Let's see here. So we are moving that for a recommendation. We're recommending an action to the board that the department has sufficiently investigated, conducted a serology case review, and that the department make notification in cases 2, 3, 6, 8, and 9 if conviction information for those suspects is confirmed. And we recommend that the department, that the review is complete and that the department close the review with that action that we've stated. So I guess can somebody present that motion and then?
This is left, so moved.
Okay, and then a second.
Kathy, I'll second it.
Okay. And then Ms. Taylor, can you take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Levine, Dr. Levine,
Dr. Levine is muted.
Who is muted?
Dr. Levine.
Let me. Right now.
I texted
There
him.
he is. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
yes,
Okay, aye.
thank you. Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Schelling,
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Zersi.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Brad, for all that. The next item is the hair case review and field test regulations. And for that information, Ms. Curtis and Ms. Jenkins.
Good afternoon for those of us on the East Coast now. Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
I can.
Good. All right, I will try to roll through this fairly quickly. The hair review for those, for the new committee member was a microscopic hair comparison case review that was begun by the Forensic Science Board in 2016. The department has been identifying positive probative associations from our archived case files. We've got about 1 million in the State Records Center that we have wage employees going through and scanning the certificates of analysis. And as they do that, they are identifying positive probative hair associations. With that information, our department legal assistant is sending letters to the courts asking if there was a conviction resulting from that case. And if we are able to ascertain that there was a conviction, trying to determine if the department is able to obtain a transcript of the examiner's testimony. And there are 2 levels of review. The review team, which is comprised of a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and one of our in-house scientists, often one that conducted microscopic hair comparison case examinations back in the day when we were still doing them as a department. Those 3 individuals will review a transcript that we're able to obtain, and they will make a recommendation on notification or not based on whether or not there were any overstatements by the scientist of what was valid for at the time for microscopic hair comparisons. That notification recommendation from the review team is taken to the board subcommittee, and the board then makes a final determination, subcommittee makes a final determination of whether or not a notification is to be done. So the last time I talked with you about this review was back in May of 2019. And So to bring you up to speed on what's occurred since that time, we've continued to send out letters as we've identified positive probative associations, and we're probably around 2 to 225 notifications between Ms. Taylor, who did it previously, and Ms. Norton, who has now taken up doing it as the department's legal assistant. We have obtained since that time some transcripts. There was a meeting of the subcommittee on May 13th of 2019 where they indicated that they were supportive of 5 notifications in cases there that had been reviewed, and those were done by the board chair. And in addition, we've had 9 new transcripts that were put together, and we just had the HARE review team meet on June 5th of 2020 to review those 9 transcripts. They have made recommendations on those 9 transcripts, and hopefully the board tomorrow we can work to get a 3rd member of that subcommittee available so that we can set up a review for those 9 transcripts and have a determination on what notifications, if any, would be made on that. So that's the breadth of what we've done with the HARE review. It's the type of thing that will continue going on until I retire. But we are moving on to identify cases and try to obtain transcripts as we're able to do so. I can answer any questions that anyone might have on the microscopic hair comparison case review. All right, hearing none. Mr. Chair, if you would like, I can move on to the proposed amendments for the field tests.
Sure, that'd be fine. Thanks.
This is a regulatory action that was initiated by the Forensic Science Board to permit under the department's regulations. We currently are able to approve presumptive chemical field tests for the use in preliminary hearings under Virginia Code for officers to be able to testify to those results only for preliminary hearing purposes. They would subsequently be confirmed by laboratory testing. As the opioid crisis got to be of concern with officers handling unknown powders and the potency of those opioids increasing, we were approached by members of law enforcement. The department was approached by members of law enforcement wanting us to consider presumptive mobile instruments. And the most common is a Raman spectrometer. But there are others that are available out on the market. We had the ability to only to approve presumptive chemical tests under the regs as they were drafted and were in effect at the time. So we initiated this amendment process to allow presumptive mobile instruments. The last time that I talked with you all about this was back in May again in 2019. We were at the proposed stage of the regs. This is a long process of regulatory change. We were not able to do any kind of expedited process. After we had the proposed regs reviewed, they were approved by the governor September of 2019, and they ran in the Virginia Register of Regulations October 28th, 2019. Public comment was received. We actually got no public comment during this time period. And that public comment period ended January 8th of 2020. We had a public hearing, the board had a public hearing to accept comment on January 6th, 2020, and we had no public comment and no members of the public in attendance. The board had hoped to consider the final reg amendments at their May meeting, but that was not to be because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we actually had a special meeting of the board on June 29th, 2020, a virtual meeting in order for them to approve the final reg amendments prior to the 180-day deadline that's in the governor's executive order. Those were approved unanimously on June 29th. They were submitted for executive branch review on July 2nd. And where we will go from here is the executive branch review with the DPB and the secretary's office and the governor reviewing those will take place. If they are approved, those reg amendments will appear in the Virginia Register again And then they become effective 30 days thereafter if there is no public outcry about them proceeding through, which we're not currently anticipating. And that will just allow the department to consider those presumptive mobile instruments for the purposes of preliminary hearing testimony only. So that's an update on where we are with the proposed amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Any questions for her in these two topics? Alrighty. All right, moving on to new business. I would call on Ms. Bowden to provide an overview of the PERC tracking system.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So good afternoon. My name is Madison Bowden, and I am the Physical Evidence Recovery Kit Tracking System Coordinator at DFS. And today I'm going to provide a quick overview of the PERC tracking system and how it functions. So today I'm just going to discuss what the system is, who uses it, and how it's used. I'm also going to touch on how victims can use the system to access information about their kits. So first, what is the PERC tracking system? It is a web-based system that tracks the location and status of PERCs in Virginia. It only tracks victim PERCs and Office of the Chief Medical Examiner PERCs. No suspect PERCs are entered into the system. Also, it does not serve as an official chain of custody for any PERC. Although when you log on, it kind of looks like one at times, it does not serve as an official chain of custody. It has three main purposes. First, it allows victims and survivors to see information about their kits, and they're able to do this through the victim portal. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. It also helps us track the dissemination and use of PERCs. And it tracks compliance with the PERC legislation, which I'll also touch briefly on in a little bit. And most importantly, the use is mandatory starting July 1st. So that date has already passed, and we already have a number of agencies actively using the system. So different types of agencies have access to and use the tracking system. These include DFS, collection sites, which include hospitals, medical centers, forensic nursing programs, and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. The Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services uses the system as well. They store our anonymous kits. And law enforcement. Now, each type of agency has their own unique homepage, permissions, and kit visibility settings, simply because their roles in the system are so different. So what do we mean when we say kit visibility? Well, the rule of thumb here is that you can only see actions taken on kits where your agency is affected in some way. There are a couple of exceptions to this, and the first of these is DFS, because they're able to see all actions taken on kits. Collection sites like hospitals and medical centers have a slightly narrower view, which is outlined in purple. DCLS, the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services, can only see a couple of things as well, through collection all the way through whenever the law enforcement agency receives the kit, if it becomes offense reported. And then law enforcement, outlined in blue, they're another exception. They can see from the collection of the kit the whole way through any subsequent actions taken by DFS. So now I'm going to walk through each agency type's role and their responsibilities in the system. And when each agency type does their part, it helps build the life course of a kit. And this process begins at DFS. So as soon as DFS gets a shipment of brand new PERCs in from the manufacturer, they're immediately registered in the PERC tracking system. Then it gets logged when they're distributed to the hospitals or medical centers. Next up are collection sites. They log when they receive new PERCs from DFS, when they collect the PERCs from victims and survivors, and then they also log every time they transfer PERCs. Now they transfer anonymous PERCs to DCLS or a non-Virginia storage facility like a federal facility or a military base. And if it's an offense reported PERC, those go to law enforcement. The Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services is one destination for collected kits, specifically those anonymous kits that I mentioned. For those are the ones that at the time of the forensic exam, the victim or survivor doesn't report the offense. So in the system, DCLS logs when they receive anonymous kits from hospitals. They can then transfer those perks to law enforcement if the victim then decides to report the offense. And in the system, they can extend the retention period. Law enforcement is the other destination for collected kits, but specifically for offense-reported ones. And those are the ones where at the time of the collection, the victim and survivor doesn't report or decides to report the offense to law enforcement. Law enforcement has a lot of responsibilities on the system. They log when they receive perks from hospitals, DCLS, other law enforcement agencies if the investigation is transferred. And then also they log when DFS returns an analyzed kit to them. They also log when they transfer kits to DFS or a private lab for analysis, if they transfer the kit and the investigation to another law enforcement agency, and when they enter perks into evidence in court. They also designate a statutory reason if they're not going to submit the perk to DFS, and they can grant victim pins. Now, victim pins are only granted by the investigating law enforcement agency if doing so is not going to interfere with the investigation or prosecution of the offense. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the PERC legislation, because the PERC tracking system also helps law enforcement agencies stay compliant with that PERC legislation, because this legislation mandates that law enforcement agencies must submit a PERC to DFS for analysis within 60 days of receiving it. There are 5 exceptions to this, and we call those the statutory reasons for non-submission. Those 5 are listed here. Anonymous kits go to DCLS for anonymous storage. If a kit is part of a routine death investigation and there's consensus that analysis isn't warranted, it doesn't need to go to DFS within that 60-day window. Same with kits connected to out-of-state offenses or the transfer a kit to another law enforcement agency. And then finally, if a kit is not connected to a criminal offense, doesn't need to go to DFS within that 60-day window. And every month we contact law enforcement agencies that are not compliant. So we pull the data just to verify whether or not law enforcement agencies are either submitting kits within that 60-day window or designating at least one of the 5 mandatory exceptions. So finally, the process wraps up at DFS. So DFS receives those perks from law enforcement. Then they issue reports whether or not the analysis has been completed or terminated, and then they return the kits back to law enforcement where those analyzed kits remain. So when each agency type enters the actions they take on perks, it builds a clear history. So we start with those DFS entries where they were registered and distributed to the hospital. The hospital receives, collects, and transfers that kit out. DCLS, if they're involved, can receive the kit and send it to law enforcement if it becomes offense reported. Law enforcement receives the kit from DCLS or directly from the hospital. Then they transfer it to DFS for analysis. And then finally, DFS receives it, issues a report, and then returns it to law enforcement. So now I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about the victim side of things. So at the time of the forensic exam, forensic nurses must provide information for victims so they can access the victim portal. So they can log into the victim portal regardless of whether or not they have an anonymous perk or an offense reported perk. But what's contained in that victim portal and how it's accessed is very different depending on the type of perk. So for anonymous perks, all they need is that perk ID, which, as I mentioned, is given to them at the time of the forensic exam. When they log on, they'll be able to type their kit number right into this space, hit get status, and be directed to the victim portal for their anonymous kit. For their offense reported perk, they will need a perk ID and a victim PIN. And remember, that victim PIN is granted by the investigating law enforcement agency if it's not going to interfere with the investigation or prosecution of the offense. So they'll go to the victim portal screen, type in their perk ID, another box will pop up for their PIN, they'll hit get status and be directed to the victim portal for their offense reported perk. So this is what the victim portal looks like if a victim or survivor has an anonymous perk. There is never any personally identifying information ever entered into the tracking system, so there will never be victim names, addresses, or anything like that. All that's in there is very generic information describing the current location and status of their kit, when it's set to be destroyed, a history, and some other resources are there as well, including how to report the offense to law enforcement, how to delay the destruction of their kit, among other resources specifically for victims and survivors of sexual assault. On the other hand, the victim portal for offense reported perks looks a little bit different, and like the other victim portal and the entire tracking system, there is never any personally identifying information ever entered. So when they log on, they can see generic statements regarding their kit's location and status, the history of their kit. We provide them with the statewide average turnaround time for DNA cases, and we update this monthly. And we provide those same victim and survivor resources that are available in the other victim portal. We provide additional victim and survivor resources. The first two I have listed here can be accessed without even having to log into the victim portal. So the victim portal manual helps them walk through how to log in, and the victim and survivor FAQ, pretty self-explanatory. It answers basic questions about the victim portal. For collection sites, we provide them with a victim information form that helps them comply with the statutory requirement to provide the perk ID and information about the system. So on that sheet that we have in English and in Spanish, they can provide the perk ID, and then they'll also have instructions on there as well. We have a similar information form that law enforcement can provide. It's just a resource that helps them communicate the victim or survivor's perk ID and victim PIN and gives instructions for accessing the victim portal. This is available in English and in Spanish. So that is the end of my overview of the perk tracking system. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
This is Kristen Schelling. I'm just curious. You said you had a go live date or mandate of 7/1/20. Is that correct?
Yes.
What kind of percentage of compliance do you have so far? I mean, you're only a week and a half in.
Right. So we started training agencies to use the system pretty much as soon as I started in January, and also with the previous perk tracking system coordinator before me. So we did not wait until July 1st to get people trained and access onto the system. This has been an ongoing process since 2019. At this point, we have about half of the law enforcement agencies on the system and actively using it, and almost all of the collection sites, hospitals, and medical centers and things. DFS is on the system as well, as is the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services. So we have a lot of active engagement on the system currently, despite it only technically being mandated starting on July 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Alrighty. Next item is public comment. Is there any members of the public who would like to provide a comment at this time? Alrighty. Hearing none, this concludes the agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
This is Les, so moved.
And do we have a second?
Ken, so moved.
All right, Ms. Taylor, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Beatty?
Aye.
Ms. Bottrell?
Aye.
Dr. Corrado?
Aye.
Dr. Cotton?
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh?
Aye.
Director Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Levine?
Aye.
Dr. Maha?
Aye.
Mr. Myers?
Aye.
Ms. Schelling?
Aye.
Mr. Spender,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Zersi.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, so the motion passes. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all. Appreciate your assistance and thanks to the departments.
Thank you, Rich.
All right.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.